Harley Refsal grew up on a farm near Hoffman, Minnesota, homesteaded by his Norwegian immigrant grandparents. A woodcarver since the 1960s, he has been teaching workshops and seminars throughout North America since the early 1980s, and later also in Scandinavia. He is especially known as a torchbearer and popularizer of what has become Scandinavian-style flat plane figure carving. He moved to Decorah in 1972 to work at Luther College, where he held a number of different administrative positions and also taught courses in Norwegian language and culture. He holds the title of Professor Emeritus of Scandinavian Folk Art at Luther. A charter member of Caricature Carvers of America, he has researched and written 5 books and numerous book chapters and magazine articles on Scandinavian figure carving, and has served as an invited guest curator for a number of exhibitions. In 1996, he was decorated by the King of Norway, receiving the St. Olaf Medal for his contributions to Norwegian folk art, especially figure carving, in Norway as well as in North America. In 2012, Refsal was named Woodcarver of the Year by Wood Carving Illustrated magazine, and he has also been featured in the PBS Peabody Award-winning television series Craft in America. We are also joined today by 2 of Harley's former students who are now incredible instructors of their own right, Liesl Chapman and Charles Banks. Liesl and Charles, or Banks, please introduce yourselves and your connection to folk art in general, especially your connection to Harley Refsal in particular. We'll start with you, Liesl.
Hey, wow, it's just fantastic to be here and celebrate the career of Harley, and greetings out to Harley and all the Refsals who are tuning in. I believe that I met Harley in the vicinity of 10 years ago, and learned he was my initial coal roasting teacher, and my connections to him are primarily through the North House Folk School. At this point, I am in my retirement myself, am deep down the spoon carving and coal roasting hole, and it is becoming the food for my soul and the healing art of craft for my soul. And those are things that I really began to learn from Harley. And before I pass it over to Banks, I would just say just 3 things about Harley that I think are my experience of him. Harley creates a kind world. He creates that kind world through feeding of souls and healing through craft. He creates that kinder world through teaching everybody, and through the beautiful and magical characters that populate his flat plane carving world. Harley honors the common person, and Harley embodies a spirit of generosity and inquisitiveness, those are my thoughts as we get into this beautiful hour of celebration.
Thanks, Liesl. Now I'm going to pass it over to you, Banks.
Hey, all right. Thank you. Hello, Refsals. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm going to start with probably my favorite Harley story ever. I was first introduced to Harley in the 1990s through his book. And his book was the Wood Carving the Scandinavian Style. As I got this book and tried and failed miserably, I was like, I got to meet this guy. I got to see what this guy is all about. So in being a young guy with the little kids and teaching and coaching, didn't have a lot of time, but summertime was available. I could track him down. So I did track Harley down. The first time I ever tracked him down and met him was in Grand Marais, Minnesota. I didn't have enough money to take the class, but I had enough money to take a little vacation with my family, and I kind of bombarded his class one day. And so I get to the folk school in Grand Marais, and I walk in and right in on his class. I had my daughter, she was little. I had her in my hand or my arm, and walk into the class, and it was just like this. Harley, I kid you not, it was just like this. This really happened. It's real. A sea of carvers part. And at the end of the sea of carvers parting stood a lone figure with light streaming down. It was an amazing moment for me. I walked up to you. You won't even remember. I walked up to you with my book in my hand and my little daughter Hannah up here. And I said, are you Harley Refsal? Well, yes, I am. And welcome to, and I said, well, I brought my book for you to sign. I'm sorry I didn't have enough money to take the class, but when's the next time I could possibly take a class from you? And he looked at me and he said, well, here or in Norway. And from that point on, I was hooked. And I took as many Harley classes I could possibly have after that point. And Harley, you are such an amazing person, and you've given us so much. And we want to, again, continue on with the traditions that you have laid in place for us as folk artists. But again, that's it was a wonderful moment. And you signed my book for me. Here it is. To Charles, keep up the fine carving. Best regards, Harley Refsal. Thank you, Harley. I have more stories, believe me.
And we want to get to those because we know we're going to have lots of wonderful memories and lessons shared here today. So I just want to say thanks for being here to Liesl and Charles again. And before we ask any more questions, we're going to share the short film that award-winning producer Dana Conroy of Pioneer PBS has created, celebrating Harley's teaching and legacy. So Andrew, I will now pitch it to you to stream the video.
It's a slow me down kind of thing, which is important. The more we up the speed in our vehicles or in our computers, we need the counterbalance. The world isn't counting on a little whittled figure by any means, but we do need that here and here. Whether it's wood carving or knitting or whatever it is, slow art is about as therapeutic as I know of. That's what keeps me going. It feeds my soul, and I am delighted when I can hook somebody else as well. My first exposure really to wood carving was when I was about 7 years old. We lived just near Hoffman, Minnesota on a farm, and had a country school. It was the same country school, that one-room school that my mother had attended as a kid. There were about 17 of us in the school. And we would very often, a lot of us would carry pocket knives, and during recess or noon hour or something like that, we'd go out and whittle. In the mid-1960s, 1965, I went to Augsburg College in Minneapolis. I was in the choir there, and we had a European tour that summer. Oftentimes we would sing our concerts in the evenings, but in the daytime we would be in these small towns or bigger towns, and we would just kind of wander up and down the streets and look around and drink in all we could there of the culture and the color that we saw. I was also drawn to wood carvings because I had not seen anything like that in the States. We had whittled in country school and things like that, but in Norway there were tourist shops. When I saw these little, figures this tall, it was just sort of love at first sight. I've fiddled around with a knife ever since I was a kid. That can't be that hard. That looked really fun. I carved this one for says, "Congratulations, Carl," that's our older son, "Decorah High School graduation, May 29th, 1994. So that was a graduation gift that he got. There was not really a well drawn out plan. Everything that had to do with not only wood carving in general, but this sort of a whittling thing, just not with a whole arsenal of tools, but just a knife like this, that I carry those with me pretty much all the time, and that it just grew and grew and grew. Eventually had access to a bandsaw, so I could saw out the shape of a horse, for example, and to get rid of some of the waste wood that I didn't want on there anyway. I never got tired of it, just became more and more fulfilling.
This is his knighthood award. Have you seen this one? That's from King Harold. And there's a medal there. Well, that was a big deal. I mean, he's a knight of the realm. Before Harley and Norma were married, we were both head residents in a dormitory, and we would sit together and carve in the evenings. Harley's carvings, his figures, they represent life in the Midwest. Western Minnesota, actually, is where these immigrant families had farms, and he was carving his uncles and his neighbors. They tell the story of Norwegian American immigration in the Midwest. What you have in some of Harley's carvings is lore that's sort of extracted from his acquaintance with farmers and neighbors and people who sort of made their life in an immigrant community. He pulls that out and puts it into form that lasts. That tells a story. I mean, there's two people there. They're working on a job. They're moving this great big boulder. It's a sort of farming couple, rocks in the fields. That was a big deal. He's showing how they would work together on the farm, and that's one of my favorites.
I think I'll probably do a lady. I'll do a guy. I'll do a lady.
He does Scandinavian-style flat plane figure carving. So sort of a rough, minimalist style with a single knife. As the name implies, it's these flat planes rather than having very smooth cuts. It's different than maybe than a fine art painting. It was the art of the common person. They had a single knife. They would carve figures, they would carve spoons, utilitarian objects. Sometimes it was just embellishments. It was something that was accessible. Everyone had the tools, everyone had a knife. Like many folk art styles, it evolved from one person passing it on to another.
This basswood is about the most friendly and very, very commonly used wood when it comes to carving.
Much better than what I'm carving. So with the spoon, especially like a hardwood like this, when it's wet, when it's green, it's softer, it's a little easier to carve. So if you keep it in the freezer, that retains the moisture, and then I can pull this out of the freezer and let it thaw, and it's as if I just cut it down. It's much harder when it's dry. In addition to the grain, it's so much stronger than basswood, so you can get you can get a spoon or whatever real thin and nice. It's not a chunky fat spoon.
Mm-hmm.
We have photos of me as a toddler, literally in a diaper, wood carving, and even younger, standing at my father's knee, watching him carve. So I was definitely his youngest student. I think my parents gave me a knife when I was 3 years old. It's definitely been important to him to pass that on and to see me wood carve. I think more so it's important to him though to see me enjoy handwork. Whether it would be that style of wood carving or anything else, I think he just wants me to enjoy our work with my hands and making things.
As a family, we lived in Norway. Our 2 boys went to school there. One was in kindergarten and one was in about 3rd grade. When we lived in Norway, we lived in a small town up in the mountains, and there were people there that said, "Could you teach a class here?" And I was kind of, well, gee, that's kind of why I came here we came here. It was a tradition of whittling that not everybody still had. In fact, most of it had just sort of trickled away through the years. Here I was, young enough to be a child of them, and I was the teacher. But there again, that was very, very helpful because I could maybe do some of the technical things, but they could tell me the stories, and they could tell me the cultural background for all this kind of stuff.
In the 1960s and 70s, something called Hansen's Law kicked in with full gusto in many Scandinavian American communities. A principle named after Norwegian immigrant and scholar Marcus Lee Hansen, who said the 3rd generation tries to remember what the 2nd generation tried to forget. Norwegianness and Swedishness was something to be recaptured and reclaimed.
Even before we went to Norway, we had been involved with Vesterheim Museum here in Decorah that has a wonderful, wonderful collection of wood carvings. And so when we came back from Norway, then I was invited to teach courses down here. Finally, I was teaching classes in areas around here, but also getting invitations from Alaska and Florida and California and Vermont, sort of all over the place, and then also in Norway. So I was flying over to Norway and also to Sweden to teach classes there too.
She's making lefse, L-E-F-S-E, sort of a potato lefse. And first she's taken part of that away, made a little ball about the size of a baseball, and then rolls it out so it's like a great big placemat. And then you put wonderful things on it like butter, sugar, and more sugar, and brown sugar, and then roll that up and eat it. I can't put it exactly in real succinct words in a sentence or two, but any kind of handwork. So regardless of the material, if it's leather or if it's wood or if it's metal,
it gets one out of oneself. Oftentimes when I'm teaching a class, we start out with something just to get us to use the knife safely and effectively. Oftentimes we start out with just doing a carrot. I call this a 1-carat necklace or necktie. I use a lot of those. And I'll just go all the way around here. Now, so this is going to be the green, this is going to be the orange. So, first thing I want to do is kind of do the shaping of the carrot. This is nice basswood, which is a pleasure to carve. Now I want to sort of show off where the green is going to come in. Notice that I push or I pull really on the back of the blade. I push with my thumb, push it through like that. So I'm not employing all the strength possible with my right hand, and I'm right-handed. So rather than pushing as much as I can, I like to be in control, so I'm sort of steering with my right hand, but I'm really doing the hard work. I'm pushing it along. The motor is my thumb of my left hand. Notice here that I'm not trying to make it as round as a dowel, for example. I like the facets, and that's one of the joys that I like when it comes to this kind of carving. I don't want it smooth. I want it so that it looks like it was carved. It has these facets so that when a person turns it so that the light strikes it, so that there's a bounce there of color, and because of the shadow. And I always wear a bigger knife that has a thicker blade. And then I just go like this. And that gives those lines that say carrot. This one was sawn on a saw, so it's a straight 90-degree thing across the top there. That's a little bit unnatural there, so I'm going to just shape that a little bit more so it looks more like a real carrot. Make some marks across the top there that give the feel now of a carrot that has just been plucked from the garden and washed, and it'll go on the table for the beginning of a meal real soon now.
I got involved through Vesterheim. They were offering a wood carving course, and my son, who at that time was in middle school, I think, we thought it'd be a kind of a fun thing to do together. And so we signed up for a course that Harley was teaching and did it together, just a weekend course on some of the normal figure carving that he does, and really fell in love with it. This is actually a knife that I made for carving.
Yes.
So it's just it's kind of stuck with me for a while.
That's an awesome one.
It's just
Can
kind
I
of-
look at you? That's nice. That's beautiful.
I think it was about a year later maybe, where the Iowa Arts Council offered a master apprentice program. Harley called me up and said, listen, there's this opportunity. And he said, are you interested? And I said, absolutely. And then once that started, we met every week, either over here at his place or at my place, and we would carve for a couple of hours.
He has a very beautiful profile there.
He is. He's not. That's
Well, this is one of the first ones that I did with his head turned.
Even if you turn it 10 degrees.
Right,
Yeah.
makes a difference.
Right.
Yeah,
Rather than
Right.
like that.
No, I agree. Otherwise, it looks like they're on a poster in the post office or something. You know,
That's
it's like
right.
the
like,
wanted poster.
like her face, just that few degrees.
Yeah. Early on, you know, you have a figure and it's just kind of standing there and it's pretty blocky, and you're just hoping that it looks like kind of like a person when you're done. And as you get further along, then you learn how to kind of turn their head so it looks like there's more action in the piece and looks like that figure is thinking or doing something like fishing or hiking. As you progress, you start putting more action or the idea of action into the carving. And that's kind of one of the ideas behind the Scandinavian carving, is giving this idea that you have this figure that looks like it's doing something or has personality with the fewest number of strokes, the fewest number of cuts. And that way you have the simplicity of the carving, but yet the complexity of the figure that you're making. And that's a tricky thing to match up. Harley does it masterfully.
That's part of the fun, I think, is seeing how much I can do with, or how much of a story I can tell with as few cuts as possible, rather than just putting more and more detail in there. Here, my goal is to make it more spare, rather than only realistic.
Part of the enjoyment of wood carving is not only the act of making, but it's the act of making in community. Harley and I have started up a wood carving club where we've taken some of our friends and people in the community. We meet once a week on our deck and we wood carve. And it's been a safe way to gather as a community, but also to make art and to talk and have fun. That's really the joy that I think a lot of Harley's classes bring to people, that you're in this environment, this electric environment where people are excited and they're learning and they're talking. And I think it's made it easy for so many people to enjoy folk art and enjoy making things with their hands. He's really democratized handwork and wood carving and lowered the barrier to entry. Harley always says, if you can peel a potato, you can wood carve.
I'm delighted that this weekend features the work and the presence of a group of more than a dozen delightful, inspired, and inspiring students from Luther College in Decorah. As of today, they've been wood carvers for exactly 17 days. One of them is studying art. The rest of them are studying biology, Spanish, environmental studies, nursing, accounting. But I have a hope and a hunch that there will be a pile of wood chips in their future as well. Even if they don't make their living with their carving, I hope they won't be able to live without it.
I learned that nothing teaches me as much as when I am trying to teach someone else. It's greased the way for connection with other people that I would never have been able to meet. And that's been the big joy. It's hookedness into something that one really enjoys doing. And again, that's here, not as much as it is up here.
Well, that was just wonderful. Maybe some of you have seen that production before. There's wonderful credits at the very end of the film, and you can also view the film online. But we are so honored to be showing it here today, because this is about showing this beautiful documentary, but also celebrating Harley as a teacher and as a folk artist, with some of his wonderful once students, now accomplished teachers themselves, and also wonderful friends. So I want to invite Banks and Liesel back to the virtual classroom here. As I say classroom, this isn't a class today, but virtual audience. And we want to talk with you. We want to hear some of your thoughts on learning from Harley, and as a folk artist yourself, some of the concepts that were brought up by Harley and others in the film. And also our audience members today. It's so wonderful to see so many people chiming in where they're coming in from today, zooming in from. If you have questions or you have things you want to share, I want to remind you the Q&A section is in your menu bar. And if you click on the Q&A section, you can put some questions in you might have for Banks or for Liesel. But also Andrew and I will be kind of kicking it back and forth, asking them some questions as well. So to start us off, I would like both Liesel and Banks to comment on the very, very opening comment that Harley makes, is that carving is a slow me down kind of thing. And I'd like you to speak as practicing folk artists yourselves, maybe comment your thoughts on this concept as well. So we'll start with you, Liesel.
Oh my goodness. The past 2 years living in the couch potato world of Netflix. Oh my goodness. Has never been more timely than it is now, to slow down, to be with real things, to carve in community, to let the mind rest and forget, or maybe put a pause on all the things in the world right now that are very hard for us. And you know, he talked about, and he talks continually about having food for our bellies, and now we need food for our soul, and craft as the healing art of craft. So I think that I know that I find when my mind is racing, that slowing down and being present in the moment, and working with knives, which I will just parenthetically say, it is well known that Harley has a love affair with knives, and only perhaps Norma and his family know how many knives he has, and he may have probably hidden some so that no one knows actually how many knives he has. But the reason that I went with knives is that you have to be present with knives. And so that slowing down, being present, being in a state of flow is, I think, what helps heal us. And I think it's a critical message for us at this pivotal point in time.
Thanks, Liesel. Banks, do you want to comment on the slow me down sort of thing of carving?
Yeah, you bet. So we have, I'm going to go back to what Liesl said as well, the healing art of craft. And that's what Harley mentions regularly when you're in his classes. Community is number one. The act of carving itself is probably secondary to just being together as a group. COVID did a lot of strange things to us as communities, as individuals. And if we can get back to that type of community again, that's kind of the direction that we're hopefully going to be going. Yes, working with your hands is one of the things that Harley promotes and wants people to get back to. We have one tool proficiency. That's one thing that you'll hear a lot with Harley is, and not just working with many tools, but learning with one tool in particular. And of course, in the Scandinavian tradition, it's the knife. And you'll hear that a lot with his classes, and his mentality is that one tool proficiency, learning that one tool and that one, what it can offer. When I took my first class with Harley, when I did have a chance, I showed up, it was Grand Marais North House Folk School. I showed up with my whole toolbox. I'm going to bring everything I own to the class. And I walked in the door, and Harley looked at that toolbox. He said, "What's in that toolbox?" And I said, "Oh, it's all the tools I have." He said, "Do you have a knife in there?" I said, "Sure, yeah, I have a knife in there." He said, "Okay, take the knife out and take the toolbox back to your truck. That's the one tool you're going to learn how to use." And another one of those aha moments, and it just hooks you a moment. So
that's great. That's great. In the video, we heard from Harley's apprentice, Dan, about what makes Harley's work masterful. Can you speak to this from your perspective? How is his work or teaching style masterful? Thanks. I'll throw to you first on this one.
Okay, sure. Sounds good. My response to that is the one tool proficiency, the simplicity in the Nordic design. I think I don't know what the word master really means, master carver. Is that a designation that is given to us? Is that something we strive for? Harley is obviously definitely a master carver. Again, not sure where we get that from, but it's evident in his work. He as few cuts as possible. People are always amazed when he sits down to carve. I've watched this video numerous times, and I've been around Harley many times, and I'm just in awe. My world stops when he picks up a knife. Everything stops, and I watch. And just to watch someone with that type of proficiency work is something that we strive for. And I think as you get better, you try to get more simplified in your work. And I think you can see that in his work and in many artists' work. But again, that's something that you strive for in the Scandinavian arts, and something that Harley has definitely modeled for all of us.
Thanks.
I think I'd like to talk about Harley's teaching.
Yeah.
Because it is one thing to be a really fantastic carver, and it's one thing to be a really fantastic teacher. And to have those things together is magic. And I think the magic of Harley, as I've experienced him, is his command of technical the technical aspects and being able to articulate that. I have here, this is my face study that I made in his class, and I have kind of notes all over it about pushing and pulling and opening and do you have open eyes, do you have closed eyes, and his way of talking about, as a caricaturist, can you catch what is distinctive about what you're carving, what gives it an individualism. So he has all of that, and he invites everyone in and goes around and talks to everyone, feedback on what you're doing well, and a suggestion here, a suggestion there, always in kindness, that will make your carving more joyous for you. And not to get into a perfectionist or, oh, I did this wrong or whatever, but to make it more pleasing and joyous to yourself. And then if you're lucky enough, then you get one of the carrots, and you can learn to make a carrot, and you can wear that carrot around your neck, and then that lets everyone know that you're one of Harley's little carrot gnomes. And as I've started carving my own carrots and giving them to people and being silly about it, so there's this generosity that Harley has in teaching that spills over. And I remember him talking about that there was the craft of the common folks, and then there were the guilds, and that the guilds, you kept all of that secret, what your knowledge was, and that was for the fancy people. And Harley's spirit is just the opposite of that, of sharing, of letting it go. I love the phrase of democratizing craft, so that everyone can be involved, because it is good for the soul.
Thank you, Liesl. I think I want to pepper in here a question from one of our viewers today. Ellen says that she has heard Harley talk about the concept of flow. And so she's wondering if either of you could speak or say anything about that concept of flow. I think of both of you, Liesl, because I saw your work. You were working during the pandemic and posting on Instagram and documenting, and also Banks. I've seen you in the flow when you're teaching and going. So maybe now we'll kick to Banks and tell us a little bit about this concept of flow when you are carving.
I think for many, many years, Harley's been such a mentor and such a modeler of the process. And I think that is what that's the direction I will go when I try to refer to flow in the carving process and in the Scandinavian style. Having him as a mentor, watching him go through the process of the idea to the pattern, the design work, the transferring of materials to a blank, to cutting out the blank, to carving the blank into a character, to painting, the full process from beginning to end, the flow from beginning to end is, well, with Harley, very fluent. And I don't know if everybody knows this, but Harley does his own design work. He creates his own characters. He is got the ability to draw and create these characters. And he will say, as he said, this is a quote from Harley, who says there's absolute freedom in creating your own characters, or having the ability. Nothing wrong with getting books and patterns, but there's so much joy and so much freedom in that flow of the idea to the actual end carving, which is excellent. At some point I've got to read you my quotes from other carvers. And I don't know if that's the time now, but Liesl can talk about flow as well. But
yeah, we'll come back to you, Banks, with the next question, because it's going to be perfect timing for this. But Liesl, you go about flow first.
I think that for me, when I feel like I'm in flow, that time melts away. And I think that's what part of what Harley talks about, of the slowing down. It's like slowing down and speeding up all at the same time. It's like some sort of weird time warp. And I know when I'm in it, when I'm like, oh my God, it's 2 hours. Like, where did that go? So that's a sign of flow. But I think also that flow is when you can let your hands that your hands are the knowledge of the body, and that through your hands and your mind-body connection, I think things flow from your heart. And so in flow, it is not so much thinking, but it's almost like watching, like, oh my goodness, I didn't expect that. And so it is a presence and an odd state of mindlessness, even though you are totally mindful. I don't know. It seems like contradictions, but they feel true to me. And I think that it also comes because it's like a pianist who practices scales. And the point is not to practice scales. The point is to be transcendent when you do a beautiful concerto or a jazz riff, that you're just in that moment. And what precedes it is a lot of building of that knowledge in your hands. And so I think Harley's teaching is so good because he is preparing your hand to remember those strokes, so that then you can be in the flow and your hands know how to do it. So I think that's when I feel in flow, and how I relate it to things that I've learned with Harley.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. So Banks, Martin, Harley's son, speaks to how carving is also about community. And I know that you have turned to a community of carvers and have gathered some Harleyisms and some quotes about Harley from other folks. And so we'd love to hear through you from the community.
Oh yeah, thanks. Okay, good. So yeah, when I was asked to do this for Harley, thanks. So again, that was a very high honor, but I'm not as eloquent as he is, as we heard him speak and such. So I reached out to other carvers and I got some quotes back from other carvers. So I'd like to read those to you guys, and to Harley, this is for you. So people said, here's my favorite one. I put it at the top. Harley, you're a god. That's number one. Okay, but it does, it's still good from here on out. Another quote, Harley, your teaching and friendship have meant more to me over the years than you could possibly know. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Manga talk. Another quote, there are few people as kind and gracious as you. Thank you, Harley. One of the many life experiences I've had, classes with Harley are at the top of the list. Thanks for all you have done. The next quote, Harley, what an inspiration you have been. Your artistry, teaching, and leadership are a life's legacy beyond compare. Another one, my favorite memory of Harley's teachings are his stories. It was like he brought us to Norway each time we met, and I got to take a piece of Norway home in the form of a carving. Harley, we love you. Harley taught a difficult art form in a way even beginners could be successful understanding. Although I still can't make clean cuts. Harley, help. And my absolute favorite one, Harley Refsal, there can be only one. When I was in classes with Harley, some of my favorite memories with Harley, I had a really difficult day. I must have had a difficult day. I was not carving well. I made a big mistake on a carving. I cut off a huge area. I probably shouldn't have. As we know, as carvers, reductive sculpture. Once you take it away, it's pretty tough to put it back. And like Lisa mentioned, you're in classes, he's always around the room. He never sits down. He's always moving. He always makes connections with everyone, whether it be 10 minutes to 1 minute, whatever. It's there, always, constantly moving. And as I was carving and I made this big, massive mistake and cut a big chunk off, he walked up and he kind of slides up to me and he kind of whispers. He said, I see you're having a little frustration here. I said, yeah, I think I made a bad mistake. And he says, they have a word for that in Norway, in Norse or Scandinavian. I said, oh, what is that? Well, I don't speak it well. It was like sma etapa. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? And he said, smart afterwards. a lot of things we learn by mistakes, of course. But yeah, that was a great, I like to use that one. Smart afterwards, trial by error. And another one of my favorites, of course, is when you're having difficulty, like with the face being the most difficult of our figure carving, 4 figure carvings, usually difficult for me. I was having trouble with the face and it just wasn't working. And again, you know, another time he'd come around and how's it going? And wow, having trouble with, I think I messed up the face. I think I'm gonna have to start over. He took the character, held it in his hand, turned it a few times. And he said, you know what? There's still a face under there. I said, I don't believe it. So I said, show me. Took my knife and cut, just a few strokes. That face was taken away and a new face emerged. Harley his teaching is wonderful. His teaching is masterful. He always made you feel good, always accentuate the positive, made even your mistakes feel like they weren't mistakes. And I thank you for that, Harley. I've got more stories, but I'll let Liesl have the floor.
And what's our question again?
Community. We're talking about like Martin's comment on community, how it's about community building.
Yeah. Going in a different direction, I feel like one of the things that I really began to understand through Harley was maybe in the vicinity of 10 years ago, when I heard him say, when every time I eat with a spoon made by Fred, he was referring to Fred Livesay, every time I eat with a spoon made by Fred, I renew a conversation with him. And I have come to understand these things that we make with our hands. I renew a conversation with Harley every time I hold this and look at his simple cuts. And he's here with me, teaching me so that I can see where his knife went, and I can see the beautiful expression of this animal curling like that, and then trying to do it myself, and it's a renewed conversation, and so there is a building of community that transcends space and time, because there is this artifact from our craft that that when it's beautiful and we care about it, it will outlive us, and it will have to carry the stories itself. I heard Harley talking about, things were written in the forget book, because the folk traditions weren't carried on, and so these objects, they build community, they carry on, they teach us, even when we're not present. And I think that's something for all of us as craft people to think about, these conversations that we have with each other through the objects that we make.
Thank you so much, Liesl. It's crazy how fast a program like this could go. And I said to the panelists before we started, we should have a sequel already programmed, because there are so many stories to share. And as I look at the chat today, I see our participants sharing memories and stories, former Luther students who had Harley as a teacher, friends in Norway, just about someone from every chapter of his teaching and learning life. But before we close out our program today, I would like each of you to have an opportunity to either share one more story or memory, or a parting message that you want to give to our audience, or to Harley himself. So we'll go to Banks first, and we'll finish with Liesl.
All right, guys. Well, here it is. So I've got 3 options. just a writing of what Harley's teaching is meant to me. I think I'll hold that one. I drank a bunch of Hansa beer the other night, and I wrote a poem, and it's from the perspective of Harley's knife. Harley, I'll probably bring this to you in Decorah this summer. I'll share it with you then. But so my last two stories are this: in trying to keep his teaching going. I know I'm not Harley Refsal. I'm Charles Banks. I'm trying to keep this going. Here's two great stories. And this is really for you, Harley. Okay. So I'm down in North Carolina, and I'm at the John Campbell Folk School doing some flat plane figure carving, teaching that class. And I'm standing in line, and I've got they give you this green tag, an instructor tag, and you had to go around and introduce yourself. And I introduced myself as, I'm Charles Banks. I'm teaching flat plane figure carving. And I'm Charles Banks. And this lady looks at me. You're not Harley Refsal. I said, I know, but I'll do my best. I promise I'll try to do my best. Anyway, and my other one was, this is my favorite one. Also, standing in line somewhere, someone says, well, what are you doing here this week? An old guy looks at me, what are you doing this week? I said, I'm teaching flat plane figure carving. I didn't even say Harley's name. I just said, I'm teaching flat plane figure carving, Scandinavian figure. Guy looks at me up and down. You got some pretty big shoes to fill, boy. I said, I know I do. And as a matter of fact, I reached out to Sweden. Harley's shoes are so big. I reached out to a company. He has to import them from Sweden. This is the new shoe that they're proposed. It's kind of I guess they were kind enough to send me the pattern so you guys could all see how big those shoes really, really are. Harley, thanks so much. Vesterheim, thanks so much for putting this on. PBS for a wonderful documentary. Thank you so much, PBS as well. And Harley, I'll come down to Decorah and I'll read you my poem in person. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. That's wonderful. Liesel.
Being the copious graphic note taker that I am, and having really what I consider such an honor to be on this panel to celebrate Harley's work and career. I went back through my notes looking for the wisdom of Harley that's everywhere in those notes, and one that popped out at me. It was just written really small, and I was like, holy smokes. And Harley has talked about, Norway after the plague was just decimated, and there were no resources. The only resource was wood, and wood. And that when the potatoes came back from the New World in the pockets of the sailor, as Harley tells it, then all of a sudden there was time for leisure, and that we could slow down because the eyes have their needs as well, is something that I've learned from Harley. And so in my notes I have wood as tool, as eating, as clothing, as love. Love comes through in absolutely everything that Harley does, and lives on, as always, in the delightful little figures that surround me all the time. Wood as love.